Hey everybody, you get to see me in my home office, the window in back of me, my cases, my all sorts of stuff, right? So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about universal design for learning in a very broad sense. And yet I want to give you an example of a lesson that's designed with multiple learners and multiple learner abilities in mind. So as we go through this, you can look at it at your own pace, you can stop it, etc. But before you continue the lecture, what I want you to do is to make sure that you are aware of the Making Salsa PDF handout, which is on Blackboard, because it's an important part of some of the slides to give you a sense of what's going on. At your own pace for this week, I also want you to review two videos on Blackboard. One is by David Rose, who was the founder of CAST, and the other one is a TED Talk about using universal design. So let's go forward. Again, if you need to stop, do some things, etc., do that at your leisure. And we'll look at this introduction on UDL. So what we're going to try and do is define it, talk about the three principles, and give you a lesson experience as if you were a student, all right? That's why the handout's important, because I want you to be able to follow along. This information will also help you with how you construct the lesson that you're going to create at the end of the semester. And so I think for you to have a strong enough understanding of universal design is really important at this point. So what is it? Before I answer that, what I want you to think about is what you do digitally in your life every day. Sorry, that's my phone. I'm just going to let it go. Paying for gas, sending a postcard, renting a movie, finding a zip code. You do all of those things in an amazing way with this incredible little device that we have carrying around with us, or the laptop, or iPad, or tablet that you're looking at right now. We use technology, again, in our teaching life every single day. And it's important that you understand that technology is also our friend, and will help our students be able to process information, show us what they know. Universal design is really about embedding strategies in the process before you plan the lesson, so that you access all of those students who have a variety of learning challenges, strengths, etc. It's built on the premise that learning is different across tasks. So the way we learn math, calculation, is different than how we learn to read. Learning also is different across development. We've learned differently when we were 6, as opposed to now that we're close to adulthood or adulthood. We also have learning that's different across individuals, and we've talked about this in class. Every individual learns at a very different rate, whether they have a learning challenge that's labeled or not. So UDL strategies for instruction are really about pre-planning based on the students that we have. And it makes a lesson far more accessible. In other words, instead of planning a lesson and then saying, I have a visual learner and an audio learner, these are the accommodations that I have to put in. What I need to do as a teacher is to think about those learners and then write the lesson plan. So it's really designed to remove barriers by thinking about the needs of all the students. In this photograph, there's a ramp. The architect has removed the barrier of steps so that the walkway is accessible to everyone, right? Makes sense. That's how universal design works when we talk about learning and teaching. So this are the three major principles I want you to sort of think about. And this is a lot right now for you to sort of wrap your head around. So what I want you to do is know that as we go forward in class and in the course, you'll have a stronger understanding of what these principles mean and what they look like in a classroom. So teachers provide within Universal Design for Learning lesson plans flexible ways for students to engage with the material visually, auditorially, reading a closed caption instead of listening to a speaker, having a PowerPoint slide in front instead of just listening to a speaker. Lots of different choices to engage you, to keep you interested for the next 45 minutes. Teachers also provide flexible ways of presenting lesson content, and this will roll out as we go forward, because really an important part of our understanding is that we have to know that the students that we serve in any classroom need background information in order to understand what we're presenting. Flexible ways of expression and assessment. In other words, how am I asking that student to show me what they know? Right? The idea is that if you have a student, and the lesson isn't necessarily about just writing, right? You want them to be able to have a way of expressing that they know what that social studies lesson is about, for example, by maybe giving an oral report as opposed to giving me a written piece of paper. So the definition is the fact that it's a proactive design for everybody to gain knowledge, right? Makes sense. The other piece with universal design is the acknowledgement that the brain has different pathways, if you want to call them that, different channels of learning different kinds of things. In other words, if you look at the top, our recognition system in our brain wants to know what we're learning, which is why that multiple means of representation, the visual, the auditory, the slides versus the lecture, are the things that we want to be able to light that part of the brain up. The strategy is how we get students to learn that, and that's a different part of the brain. And multiple means of showing what we're knowing, how to express different things, right? And the other part is the affect part of our brain. In other words, why are we learning this, and why should we be motivated to even learn it? And if we're motivated, then we stay engaged. So there are different ways of engaging students in materials to keep their motivation high. So the purpose is really that we want to create knowledgeable, engaged learners, right? That's the long-term goal of why we teach anyway, is that it's not about teaching, it's about the learner. And the guidelines that UDL puts out creates a framework for creating lessons and activities that have a clear goal and that are flexible in terms of having the access for all. All right? I know you're probably scratching your head at this point. We'll continue on, and again, we're going to talk about this more as the semester rolls along. So yes, these are a lot of the framework, and if you go on to the CAST website, you will see much more information on this. Yes, this is very overwhelming at this point, and I'm going to leave this slide for you to sort of review. But again, go back to those 3 different representations in the brain. How do we want to represent material? The left side, the purpley side. Representation so that students understand the information on their most acceptable level, let's just say. How do we activate their background knowledge? How do we give them alternatives to auditory or alternatives to visual information? The middle column is about action and expression. In other words, it's about how do we organize tools for students to be able to use the physical action of actually being able to write or use manipulatives, things like that, right? We also want to note that we want to have our learners, and if you go down to the very bottom of that middle column, you want to have strategic and goal-directed learning. And that has to do with our executive functioning, right? How do we organize things in the brain? And many students need that purposeful, systematic way of being able to have information presented and how that information is managed. And they need to learn that. They just don't know that intuitively. The third column, which is the green, which is about engagement. And again, it's about keeping our students engaged with the material. And that has a lot to do with things like self-regulation, how we give them a heightened sense of what the goal and objective is for each lesson. What do I want you to learn? And this is why I want you to learn it. So put yourself in the position of being a 3rd grader, all right? The priority skill in this lesson today is the fact that we're going to write a narrative to develop real and imagined experiences using descriptive details and giving a clear sequence. Okay? Writing a narrative, using details, and making sure that it's sequential. That's our goal. My students, you all, I need to build some background information if I want them to be able to write about how to make salsa. So in your handout, what you have is the first handout is about building background. So it's in front of you, first page. We have 3 options. This is the 3 options I'm giving you to figure out how to make salsa. This is going to give you some information so that you understand how to do that. So eventually what the goal is to write a narrative on how to do this. The first option is to read. So in this handout, there is a narrative that tells you exactly how to do it in words. The second option is for you to watch a video. That's pretty outstanding, right? And the third option, wouldn't this be fun, is to make your own salsa in class. Pretty awesome. So if you go through page 1 through 4, those are the 3 options for you to figure out how to create this background so that I know how to make salsa. All right? And this is just one of those options, right? You tell your student, go use their laptop, use their computer, go over to this website, how to make salsa. So my next part of this is, okay, I want an output, right? I want my student to then, after they have the background, to be able to give me a work product. So here's an option for engagement. You can work alone. You can collaborate with a partner. or you can do it in small groups. All right. The caveat is that each person, whether it's individual, pair, or group, each person has to have their own individual response sheet. All right. That's why you make students accountable. They can do it in groups, but they have to show you their work. Before we get to this part of it, the second handout, right? The second part, it says handout number 2. If you look at this, some of our students might need some different writing tools before they get to writing that summary, right? That narrative. And it's a way that we teach them how to organize their thoughts. Yeah, I know organization can be really tough sometimes. So in the handout, really what you're doing is you're saying to them, if you think about it, you want to recall the experience. And on one of the things below, and there are 3 choices, 3, count them, you're going to either use a sentence starter, you're going to use a graphic organizer, or you're going to follow the writing example. Now, the writing example is the exemplar. It's the narrative, right? It's not about salsa. It's about how to ride a bike. If you look at these closely, these are ways that different students, depending on their strengths, know and then can use how to organize their thoughts in order to create their final written summary. I then tell my students, okay, you have 30 minutes to work on this. Go. So then you'd read with the background knowledge, look at the video, or what was the third one? Make it on your own. Those are your 3 choices. When you're done with that, you're going to organize your thoughts. So in that handout number 2, what you're doing is you're taking all of that information that you just learned about making salsa, and you're organizing it in a way so that you have a sequence. First you did this, these are the details, right? Then you did this at the end to wrap it up. You also have an exemplar, all right? The last part of it is there is a self-assessment, right? In the writing process, we want students to understand that they need to self-assess or edit their work before they hand it in. So that there is a self-assessment in here based on the different things that you want them to know. There's also a rubric. Similar to the types of things that are presented in the syllabus, right, for this class, I afford you guys a rubric to know what you're being graded on, so you know what kind of work that you want to create. All right? So the last thing is you have a written summary. And after that written summary, that becomes your work sample, right? When all is said and done, then students, you can afford them an opportunity to share, to publish their writing sample. So this is what, at the end of that handout, what it looks like. In that one portion, what you would do is you would write your how to make salsa narrative. And these are some reflective questions. Again, you wouldn't necessarily do this with a student, but you might talk about what your definition would ask you in class, what your definition of universal design is. What are the 3 principles? Describe where, how, and what you've seen UDL, if you've seen UDL used in the community, and reflect upon how you might use it in your classroom. So think about this. If you can reflect, can you name the ways to present information, to differentiate the ways the students can express what they know? Can you name the ways that how we stimulate interest in motivation for learning? Ultimately, what you're trying to do is develop clear goals for your students to be flexible enough within that lesson planning to address learner variability. So this is how you do it when you create how do you do UDL, right? It's goal setting. It's consider the variability of their students. In your Joey Pigza lesson, you're only going to be asked to look at 2 different types of students. You'd select how you want to see them assessed. In other words, what's the work product that you want from your student? You figure out your methodology of materials and the media that you're going to use. You implement it, and then you reflect on, when you've written that lesson plan, is it appropriate for my students? All of them. If not, then you go back and do the whole cycle again. And again, this is the UDL lesson planning process. So I'm clicking through these to show you that it's a cyclical type of process. Again, you as the teacher need to reflect and see, does it serve my students, all of them? And if not, I go back to the beginning. So some of what we're looking at here is looking at what UDL is. And what UDL is it affords options for how we see material. Perception, the vocabulary, and the background. They're options for action and expression. In other words, do we have our students write? Do they type? Do they listen? Do they create? What are the kinds of things, the actions, the physical actions that you're actually asking your students to do? Again, if you go down to that bottom of the middle column, executive functioning is really, really important. And you want to make sure that you have clear goals, an agenda, and have all your material. How do you engage your student? You have to recruit interest. If I told you to write a paragraph on something that you knew nothing about, it's not particularly interesting, and your motivation actually goes downhill, right? If I build background and tell you this is the type of thing that I want you to look at, and everybody sure likes food, salsa, right? You give them enough interest, right? So that you talk about how you can keep them persistent and engaged. You want your students to be reflective in what they need to do, right? And share their work with each other. So here are some really interesting flexible strategies. Some of them are a little dated in here, and some of them aren't. You can probably think about a million more, but I'm going to give you a few examples before we wrap it up for the day. All right, so student engagement. How do we have examples of how to keep kids interested? You use podcasts. Let's say I'm introducing something about a unit on fables. There are great podcasts out there that give students so much more interesting information than just giving them something to read. Another way, I'm discussing character reactions, and I'm going to use something called Kidspiration, which is a graphic organizer, right? Like that graphic organizer we were using for the other piece of writing. And what I'm going to ask them to do is show the details of the story. It gives them something visual to be able to do. You only have to have a few things in it. They don't have to necessarily write lots and lots of sentences, right? But that will give them the information they need for discussion. Engagement, also, games, really? No kidding. I think kids engage in a lot of different things. If you give them different types of things and ways to engage with things, would be a lesson about classifying animals and plants based on their characteristics, right? More interesting than a lecture. Interactive kind of websites. I'm teaching a class in science. It's about kinetic energy and potential energy. Show them a roller coaster and it demonstrates everything you want them to know. The second principle, remember first principle? Second principle is now how we present lesson content. How do we as the teachers present it? Maybe we put some things up that's a no-tech way, right? We're working on something on my classroom, let's say on context clues. Guess what? I'm going to put up a bulletin board. It's a great reminder. Kids can use it as a resource. The other piece is that you're going to have students in your classroom who do not read on grade level. There are things that are written for access, and the particular company down here is fabulous. That give you information. Greek mythology is taught in high school. What if you have students who don't read at high school level? These are called high-low. They're high interest and they're written at a lower lexile, but the content is appropriate for the age group. Again, closed captioning. You're looking at it. How do I present things in a different way? The other part of it, the last part of it, the principle number 3 part of it, is flexible methods of expression and assessment. In other words, how do students show us how they learn? Instead of a book report. Give them the tools, give them the alternative. You have students who don't necessarily do particularly well with pen and pencil. What's an alternative? A word processor. Different supported websites, speech to text, multimedia tools. There's a whole different animal, right, in terms of learning how for them to show what they know. Also, graphic organizers, using, again, something like a graphic organizer. This is a program called Inspiration that allows students to have a pre-writing graphic organizer. There are all sorts of digital worksheets and tests out in terms of, especially with iPad use and for assessment, all right? They allow students spelling support and to help accommodate handwriting difficulties. Why can't all your students use it? So implementing all of this in the classroom is a lot. And I'm going to leave you, oh, am I leaving you with this one? When you're supporting learning differences, right? Look at that middle column. You have students in your classroom who have difficulty with new concepts and vocabulary. You might have students whose independent reading level is below grade level. You might have students who have difficulty spelling. These are the things that they're going on within the student, that middle column. In my planning for my curriculum, right, that's what I want my students to do. In order to have the types of solutions out there, the right side tells you the different types of things that can be provided for your students to be able to honestly access what you need them to access in order to be successful and engaged and become learners. On the CAST website, you will see there's a great book for free. And that's the end of my story today. If you have any questions, make sure you email me. You have assignments due at the end of the week. Have a great one. And I look forward to seeing you guys week after. All right? Have a great one. Bye.